Hello and welcome to With the First Link, the podcast that hopes to make our future as bright and as just as the one that we see in Star Trek: The Next Generation. And we think that one way to do that is to recap and discuss the entire series, one episode at a time, doing our best to look at it all through an anti-oppression, pro-diversity, anti-racist lens. I'm Ruthie Cowper-Samoshi.
And I'm Matthew Simone, and today we'll be talking about the Ensigns of Command. This episode was written by Melinda M. Snodgrass and directed by Cliff Bole. It first aired on September 30th, 1989. So I noticed that your question today was about computers and our trust in computers or people.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask, given the nature of this episode about displacement and what we're seeing going on in the world right now, are we going to talk about that at some point? Is that something we're interested in talking about?
Yeah, so I definitely want to talk about that. I have a lot of thoughts about how that topic is addressed, or perhaps not addressed would be more accurate in this episode. I think I want to save it for the episode itself and for when it comes up in the episode, because I feel more equipped to talk about displacement of a people in the context of this story. I feel more equipped to do that than just to talk about it. It's certainly not something I'm an expert on, so I would feel more comfortable talking about it within the context of the story and with some problems with how it's depicted and how that connects to what is going on in the world right now.
Yeah, I had a lot more thoughts about this episode that I probably have had before because of that wider context. I was asking more questions of the ethics and morality of what was going on. But yeah, we will get into that when we get further on in the episode. So for today's check-in, what are we doing? What are we doing instead?
So for today's check-in, this is something that sort of comes up in the episode. Do you trust computers or people more?
The episode has a lot of questions around rationality. Like they post a lot of things are stated as being rational or irrational.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's fair. It's like, because it puts the whole conversation around the displacement of these people as being an irrational or rational act to move in the face of threat. And so Data absorbs it that way, but then we also have this person that he meets on the surface who then says, but we also have to take into account the emotions of the situation. But then the emotions are kind of also treated as just irrational around the situation. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think as people, we kind of talk about humans versus computers as though they developed separately from each other. Mm-hmm. But computers are developed by people. When you look at, like, certainly with like large language models and AI type stuff, all of that stuff is put together by people, or it is being fed information that was first collected by people. It comes up in this episode. There's this one character that says that computers are not going to be biased, but that's not true. Computers are going to have the same bias that the people who created the programs have.
Sure, yeah. We've seen that in the way that some computer programs respond to things like biometrics, driving choices. Like basically what happens is that we program our biases into the computer, probably unconsciously in some ways, depending on how data sets are collected. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I will say, when I am calculating marks in something like if I'm marking a math quiz or whatever, and I'm counting up the marks, I prefer to do it in my head, not on a calculator. But if I've got like large sets of marks, you know, I'll let the spreadsheet do the calculating for that. But I always want to like double check and make sure the mark feels reasonable compared to what the person was getting. So I feel like I don't trust computers I don't fully trust computers to make decisions. I want there to be like a human backup or a human involved in the decision making.
Oh yeah, I would want that too, especially if the decision is whether or not to remove me from the decision-making process as a result of having that computer. Like when you're doing a self-driving car, I mean, there's some convenience to that, but you're also removing yourself as a factor in the control of that car at that point. So it's something to think about. I know that, like, for example, like we have artists, or there are artists in my life that have had their material scraped by AI art generating tools
Yeah.
without their permission. And so we're seeing more conversation around AI coming up around about labor rights and creative rights. But it seems like in some way AI right now is also being used as a way to steal essentially creative content from other people.
Totally.
I think when it comes to inventions like this and the trust of them, it's also trusting the environment. The trust is influenced based on the environment in which it was created. And right now AI is being created in a capitalistic market for capitalistic purposes.
Right.
That said, it's not like there isn't some good use for it, but I see that AI might be used to accelerate research on medicines and life-saving things. That would be great too. So I guess it's who's behind the computer.
I think though that is a really important point, that the context that it's created in, it is where it's being created in a capitalist society and largely to promote the ideals that, or to make living in capitalism easier for the people who benefit from capitalism.
Yeah, because then we could create more content faster without needing any of you. We don't have to pay you anything. You'll just sit there and consume.
It's become a sort of joke of how did we get to a point where we're upset that the robots are taking all of our jobs? That was supposed to be a good thing. And that's because the robots are taking all of our jobs, but we still need the money that the jobs gave us. So it's not like life is easier when you've got a robot to do your work for you, because you can't just live without your work.
Yeah, and they're also, or the other thing is that they're taking the jobs that we actually wanted to keep.
Right.
Being creative and writing and stuff like that. So these are definitely some of the challenges. Now, what about in this case, a robot to make an ethical decision? Last season we had Measure of a Man, where we put a robot on trial, and we really wanted, I think, as an audience, for that robot to have rights.
Yes.
But that's not how I'm feeling about the AI that we're creating right now. It actually seems kind of insidious. I don't feel like this is data. We're not making data.
No, and I think that's part of the issue with using the phrase AI to describe what is happening right now, when it's not really intelligent. I think one way that I heard it described, and I can't remember who said this, but if you ask ChatGPT type of thing a question, what you're actually asking is, what would an answer to this kind of question sound like? It's not actually answering your question. It's just based on the kinds of words that are in your question and the words that are in other answers to that question. It will create an answer to a question. Data is not that. Data actually is able to think and learn and take in new information and consolidate that with previous experience. Data actually is intelligent and has sentience. Part of what we see in every episode that kind of explores Data's journey is that Data is in many ways, has many of the qualities of humanity. He's just sort of learning how to express and access those qualities.
Yeah, and maybe in some way actually denies his own personhood in that process. We actually see that a little bit in this episode, where we'll get to that, but Picard notes that, yes, while he did select certain musicians to emulate in his own performances, he creates a unique blend of them and chose them of his own volition. He was I'm going to pick this person and this person and do something with it. It's not like a ChatGPT that's being queried with a creative direction that's coming from the person already who's using the tool.
Right.
But because this is our experience with AI now, maybe if the first ever truly sentient AI is created, we might be some of those people that are on the other side of the argument being really, are they actually thinking though? Is this really actually a thinking machine, or is it just a bunch of heuristic algorithms like Riker describes Data in that episode?
Yeah, we're going to end up being the Maddoxes.
We might be the Maddoxes of that argument, just like you said. So anyways, something to think about. So I don't know. Do we trust computers or people? I guess it depends on who are the people that have created the computer.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, I think in saying that, do we trust people? Well, it also depends on who the people are.
Yeah, and what they're trying to do with that AI.
Yeah. Or not even with AI, just, do we trust people to make decisions? Well, people have made some pretty bad decisions too. And there are some people that I would not trust just as people. Like if you're like, do you want the computer to make the decision or do you want the person to make the decision? Well, it depends on who created the computer for sure, but it also depends on who the person is on the other side, like of that choice.
Right. Who's affected by the decision.
Yeah. Like if we're talking about self-driving cars, yeah, it definitely depends on who created the self-driving car, but it also depends on who's behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah, but also who's in front of the car. Like, did any of those people have a decision as to whether or not the car is going to be self-driving right now? The person crossing the sidewalk got hit by one of those cars. They're like, it wasn't my decision for that car to be self-driving either. So we also got to think about the other wider context of who's being impacted by the decisions being made by AI. Is what we're saying right now is that these computers are making choices, but they aren't really, like, it really still is us making these decisions.
Yeah. It all comes back to, like, as people, we need to do better. All right, so should we get into this episode?
Let's get into the episode. In this episode, an extremely litigious alien race asserts its agreed-upon right to wipe out a Federation colony in its territory after itself being absent for over a century.
Yeah, so we're starting the second season 3 episode, and I think that we can feel that in a variety of ways. We open in 10 forward, and we've got O'Brien on the cello,
which is never mentioned ever.
Yeah, but I think Cole Meany, I think I read he actually like is a very accomplished like cellist, and he's like composed pieces for cello.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But it never comes up about his character. Like we see him in scenes where he's playing instruments, but he never has a conversation or talks to anyone about being a cello player.
No, I don't discuss music. I will discuss engineering with you. If you want me to play music, you can just be in the audience.
Yeah, it's weird. Like it never comes up in DS9 at all.
No.
I don't think we never hear him playing cello or anything. Anyway, so then there's this unnamed Vulcan and a human on violin.
Maybe a viola, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Picard and Crusher are sitting in the audience.
Yeah, and you can hear I always love like when you hear like strings and instruments, the like tuning sound before the actual like music starts. I don't know.
Yeah,
I was thinking like it's just such a...
I'll put it in there. Yeah, like when that happens, I'm always like, oh, something fancy is about to go down. You know, like if you're watching live music and the strings are tuning up or whatever, you're like, oh, we're about to do something fancy and cultured.
Yeah, it's gonna sound nice.
Yes.
Data enters and he's holding a violin, but he tells Picard and Crusher that they actually should come to the second concert, not this one, because Ensign Ortiz is going to be playing, and apparently Ensign Ortiz, according to Data, is a better violin player. Because Data says that, according to his fellow musicians, he lacks soul.
Yeah, and he lifts his fist. He's like, soul. I lack soul.
Yeah.
I guess this is something, I feel like it's a gesture that's being repeated that someone else used when they talk to him about it.
Yeah.
They lack soul.
He's like, oh yeah, you hold your fist like that when you say soul.
Yeah, you say soul. Yeah, so that maybe he sounds too robotic or like mimicking of other performance styles or something, I guess. But Data learns that his honesty in this situation maybe is not always the preferred choice, because Picard says that knowing your own limitations is one thing, but advertising to them could damage your credibility as a leader. So how do you feel about that? Is it too, should you maybe be too insulated from your crew in that sense that you hide your weaknesses, or would they be more trusting of them to know that you're aware of them and sharing them with people?
I think that it is a very delicate balance.
Ooh,
I think that you need to be confident in the fact that you can be a leader, but you also need to be honest about your limitations. If you are shown to always be second guessing, like if you're not confident enough to actually make decisions and stick by them, and if you don't actually have, let's say it not that, let's not make it about confidence. Let's say if you're not actually able to make decisions because either you don't have the information, or once you have the information, you don't know what to do with it, that you're not able to make decisions and stand by them, then I would say maybe you shouldn't be leading people in that respect. So you should have some confidence, but that confidence should be earned. At the same time, you shouldn't be overconfident, and you certainly shouldn't present to your crew, I think, the idea that you're infallible.
Can Data experience confidence?
I mean, this is the question about Data. That I think he has feelings. I don't want to deny his experience of his own life, but he strikes me as someone, yes, he is confident in some things and not in other things.
Yeah, I mean, he's experiencing, it seems like, a lack of confidence right now. So that makes sense.
Like in this case, if he's saying, no, you shouldn't come to the performance where I'm playing, well, if you think you're going to do such a bad job, then why are you performing? And I'm not saying that to say, like, if you don't think you're a perfect musician, then you just should never perform. I don't actually believe that's true. I think that the fact that he wants to perform is a good enough reason that, like, you know, the fact that he clearly feels comfortable performing because he is performing in front of people. So that's a good enough reason that, yeah, Picard and Crusher should listen to him. It's kind of weird that he's like, I'm going to perform for all these people, but it's going to sound terrible. But for you, you should listen to Ensign Ortiz.
Oh, yeah, but maybe it's because he cares about their opinion more, you know, as the captain and the lead medical officer. He cares about their opinion more, which might be, you know, a desire for
approval,
validation, and approval. That seems like an emotion even out of itself. So, Dana, you're being so emotional.
I know. I mean, I think I totally understand that. Like, there have definitely been things where I would say to, like, my friends, like, oh no, you should do this other thing because that other person is going to do it better than I would. And I, you know, but whereas with a stranger, I would be totally comfortable being the person doing whatever it is. That makes sense. But I also think there is like a sort of inherent lack of logic in that. If my performance is good enough for strangers, then yeah, it's also good enough for my friends, if they actually are my friends, unless they're actually jerks who are going to be mean about it, in which case,
which they won't be.
Yeah,
they care about Data. So the performance starts, and they are playing Mozart's Ein klein Nachtmusik.
Yeah, it's like, if you know one Mozart piece, that's the one you know.
That's the one. And as soon as they start playing, Picard is called away because the Shellyak corporate have opened communications. And so he walks out. I guess Data didn't hear that communication come over, which he probably would have. He's got super ears. Yeah, just sees Picard leave.
As soon as he starts playing. And I feel like there is a moment where he's like, yeah, I was right. He didn't like it.
He didn't like it. Yeah, see, that's what happened. And he actually left the whole performance. Poor Data. So I think that seemed like an emotional reaction maybe as well.
Yeah.
On the bridge, the Shellyak corporate have opened communications for the first time in 111 years. So Riker mentions that they haven't heard from them for a long time. There's an automated message with text on the screen saying that there are humans on Tau Cygna 5, which belongs to the Shellyak according to their treaty that they have with the Federation, and that they are planning on settling this planet in 4 days. So they need to remove the humans that are there.
Yes. And in their message, they refer to the Enterprise, or to whoever is getting the message, as Federation creatures. So
which is accurate, I guess.
It is. I mean, but you can see that there is a certain dehumanization already happening.
A disdain, definitely. We're not aware that they're actually, the Federation is not aware that they're, or Starfleet anyways, on the Enterprise, they're not aware that there actually is anyone on that planet. And they just happen to know, out of all the planets, they've just memorized this. The Tau Cygna 5 is concentrations of hyperonic radiation that are fatal to humans. So they're like, there can't be anyone actually there. And so Picard just says, this warrants an investigation. And he sits down and they set a course to Tau Cygna 5, and we go to the intro.
I want to say that I feel like this is a moment where you can see the difference between seasons 1 and 2 and season 3 and beyond, because I feel like in seasons 1 or 2, this would have been a captain's log, where he would have been like, after 111 years, the Shellyak corporate have opened communications for the first time. They have told us that there are humans on Tau Cygna 5, but that planet has concentrations of radiation that are fatal to humans. So I feel like this is an I've just done what I'm saying would not have been as good.
Yeah, the whole like balance of exposition, which I think is difficult in science fiction because there's so much stuff that like might be dry or is complex. Like, how do we deal with it? Well, we'll throw it in a log. We'll put it in an observation lounge meeting. Like, but in this case, we show it because these are interesting things, and the pacing is, I think, really different in this season.
Yes,
or at least feels more like the best episodes of the previous season.
Yeah.
So we arrive at Tau Cygna 5. I guess it wasn't that far away. And Worf detects life forms on the planet and can't tell how many there are because of radiation interfering which also interferes with the transporters and the phasers.
Yeah. So Crusher suggests that it might actually be possible. She says there is research showing that it might be possible to adapt to living with such high levels of radiation. But Riker notes that if they don't remove these people, then the Shellyak will by force. And he says that they consider humans to be a lower life form and would just exterminate them.
Right. So we're not even talking about removal by force. Like, we're just talking, they'll be killed. They'll be dead. They're not going to remove them from the home. They'll just be dead. Picard asks Riker, or Data is not affected by the hyperonic radiation. So he's going to go down in a shuttle to start evacuation. So Data is going to be our first point of contact with this settlement and also try to determine how many people are there. And Riker is asked to speculate by Picard about how many people they think might be down there. And he's like, I don't know, maybe a lone survey craft. So 12 people?
I feel like that is only put in so we can have like the payoff.
The shock.
Yeah, that it's actually like more than 1,000 times that.
Yeah. So we see we see a shuttle. It's one of like the Enterprise's like dinky shuttles. It's not like a full fancy shuttle with warp drive. It's like one of the little tiny like sublight shuttles.
Data lands his shuttle and we see two humans approach it, and they deduce that it must be from the Federation by the markings on it.
Yeah, and Data greets them, and he says that and the people who approach him say that he's the first visitor that they have ever had. So Data introduces himself, and they say that their great grandparents were citizens of the Federation. So then you already know this is a few generations that have gone down here on this planet. But they offer to take him to Goshevin, who is their leader.
Yes, so Goshevin was played by an actor who was not pleased with his performance.
Okay.
And asked to be removed. And according to IMDb, there seems to be a little bit of, this is not 100% clear that this was actually the case, but because this actor asked to have his name removed, they got another actor to like overdub his speech, which...
Oh, really?
Yeah. And when I was watching it recently, and I think in the past, I've always felt like he feels a little weird and a little stilted. And I feel like part of that is that his speech is not coming out of the actor who is standing there acting.
That's fascinating, because I noticed today when I was watching the episode that there were a few places where his voice was out of sync.
Yeah.
So I was watching the episode at like 1.5 speed on
yeah.
Netflix to rewatch it. And I thought it was just an artifact of me watching it at higher speed, but it could be because of that. So I never noticed that before. It's unfortunate that is the case about the actor. I mean, obviously they can feel how they want to feel about their own performance. So does Data. But at the same time, he's one of the more memorable characters from Star Trek as one of these side characters, this like dedicated, like single-mindedness, and their delivery. I thought it was actually pretty good. Like, he's a little bit maybe overblown, but I do like him as a character. He fulfills the role that he needs to in that role.
Yeah. He is an annoying character, I find.
He's a little bit annoying, but I have more empathy for him in this most recent rewatch.
I think maybe now might be a good time to talk about some of my problems with the episode.
Okay, yeah.
Because, this is, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, the last 3 were recorded back in the spring and summer. So this is the first episode that we have recorded since the most recent conflicts between Israel and Palestine have really come to a head, with Israel just with their relentless attack on Gaza. Let's put it that way. Let's not pretend that it's anything other than that. So rewatching this episode in that context really brought to me some of the problems that I sometimes have with Star Trek. And I think in some ways, what I like about Star Trek is that it's not always super realistic in solving problems, because it's not showing us this world as it is. It's showing us what the world could be and what better looks like. So sometimes there will be things where I'll think like, I don't know, that's not super realistic, but it's okay, because it's not about who we are. It's about what we have the potential to be. And I enjoy that. But in this case, what we have is one group of people who have legal rights to this land and who are, according to certain treaties, are entitled to that land and to do whatever they want with it. And on the other side, we have people who are actually living on that land.
Mm-hmm.
And the episode just treats this as a simple question of evacuation. And I think because the episode is really framed to be about data and data's growth, they're not engaging with the question of should they evacuate, or to the extent that they do, it's only to get data to a point where he is able to be convincing. But they're not actually engaging with a larger question of, do the people who live on this land not have a right to it?
They only grapple with Goshabin's desire to stay and the people's desire to stay because of the effort that they put into building the community. But whether or not they have the right to stay there never really is talked about in the episode at all. The Enterprise only works to stall for time to evacuate them. But at no part is Picard like, actually, we shouldn't be forcibly relocating these people. Like, what can we do to defend them to stay on this planet?
Right. Like, it seems that the treaties would have been created over 100 years ago, because we haven't heard from the Shellyak in 111 years. But we will find out that the ship that crashed and ended up on this planet was launched 93 years ago. So that was after the treaties. But still, however they ended up there, they are there now. And I do think this is a little different from looking at real world problems, because if they were to leave their planet, they would in many ways be fine. They would be taken care of because the Federation is like a socialist utopia where money doesn't exist.
Right.
It's like a post-capitalist society. So it's not exactly the same as looking at displacement within this world that we live in right now.
Totally, yeah.
But I do feel that this is something that Star Trek sometimes does, is it comes, and especially TNG, it's done less with Deep Space Nine and Voyager and certainly with newer Star Treks. But it comes really close to these questions and then just doesn't actually investigate them in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and we might have been able to in, say, like, I think some of that discussion around displacement and occupation comes up a lot in Deep Space Nine, because those are like big themes of that show. And I think you're right, like, for the scope of this episode is that it is a data growth episode.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's narrowed down to like that one conversation. And so the rights of the settlers aren't necessarily brought up. On the same time, though, we also can explore it maybe from the side of, if there is some sort of calamity like this, because we have built a safer society where people's needs are taken care of, we also might be able to handle them much more easily, because we don't have to worry about these people going homeless. They will have a home somewhere.
Yes.
Because we have created a federation that can absorb this kind of shock that we don't have here, because the housing is not a right in our society.
Right.
So that's like a thing. So it's something else to think about, is that they've been able to hand wave that away, because we can always fall back on this future society that we have created called the Federation.
I think that is an important distinction. And I think that it's kind of touched on, but there is also something to be said about the home that you created and being displaced from that. Maybe it would still be the right decision, but a sort of acknowledgement that is traumatic.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Having to leave your entire home, your entire world, is traumatic. Like, they make Goshabin just such a jerk, I find.
Right.
And so dismissive of Data because he's an android and not because he is suggesting this very upsetting thing. And he's also like a dictator. Like, he makes this decision and nobody's allowed to leave, it seems.
And we'll see in the episode, and when there are times that members of the community have come together to talk with Data and about the situation, he like forcibly shuts Data down and ends the meeting. Like, they're not even allowed to have like freedom of association and stuff. But I do feel like, and I think this is to your point, is that they make Goshevin intentionally this way so that they can straw man those other arguments.
Yes.
And that we don't have to pay attention to them. And I should find now, there was an article similar to this and I should find the person who wrote it and throw it in here. But there was an article that was written about this around the Marvel series, specifically in Falcon and Winter Soldier. So their television series that took place after the snap. And so for those of you who don't know the Marvel series, there was this being called Thanos, and in the movies, they're trying to prevent him from destroying half the life in the universe. But he's successful, and so half the life in the universe disappears. But 5 years later, they manage to reverse that, and everyone comes back. But the population is just warped back into Earth 5 years later, and a whole bunch of those people are now homeless because they don't have, their homes were sold, and like they don't have anywhere to live. And so there is a group of people, and they're called, I think it's Broken Flag or the Flagless or whatever. They're basically an activist group that are trying to fight for the rights of people that are now like displaced from their homes, that don't have any citizenship, that yes, the heroes won, but now there's all this like social upheaval to deal with. And the problem is that right when they get to the point in the show to have that difficult conversation about like the rights of these people, they make that activist group blow up a building with a bunch of like, I think like civilians that aren't even like connected to it, and just kind of then dismiss them as terrorists. And it's almost like then therefore we don't need to take that argument seriously anymore. And then we don't have to like have that hard conversation in the writing and in the show. And it seems that often when we have people that want to stand up for certain rights or point out the iniquities around housing and things that would kind of poke holes in it, specifically in capitalism, that then they are vilified. And I feel like that happens to Goshevin. And I felt kind of sorry for his character because I was like, I feel like they intentionally made the guy a jerk, just like you said, so we don't have to handle that whole side of the argument. That was a long way to say all of that, but basically that's what was going on. Hey everyone, it's Matthew. I'm just jumping in here as an aside. I couldn't find that original article, but if you look up Falcon and Winter Soldier, Flag Smashers, and capitalism, you'll find all kinds of articles reviewing that same topic that we just talked about in terms of vilifying anti-capitalist groups in the superhero universe.
That's totally, I have not really watched the Marvel stuff. I've seen like one or two movies, but so I didn't know about that. But I think that is a sort of common tactic to avoid engaging with the really difficult questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think, like, yeah, you're absolutely right. There are other areas in Star Trek and other series and even perhaps other episodes where they have they're more engaged with this actual topic. In this one, they just don't. And yeah, they make it, the episode is constructed in such a way that they don't have to. So yeah.
And it's positioned as this idea of like rational versus irrational. Right. It's irrational to stay here because you are going to die.
Yes.
But and then because that wider argument around the rights isn't involved, if they were, like, I think it's completely rational for these people to be like, wait a second, like why do we have to go? Like, tell the Shellyak to get out of here. And they kind of have that conversation for like 30 seconds at the beginning, and then it basically disappears.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as you said, Riker had looked up the Artemis, and we saw that it was launched 93 years ago. I also noted that Artemis is the name of our new moon mission that's going back to the moon in 2 years.
Oh.
Hopefully it doesn't crash.
Hopefully it doesn't go off course.
Stranded on the moon. Yeah. And it was lost, and searches didn't find them. And Data tells Picard that there are 15,253 people on the planet, and now they have no way to get them all off. With the transporters, they can't do it with just the shuttles.
Yeah, it'll take 4 weeks to do it with shuttles. They have 3 days. So Picard is like, well, okay, prepare the colonists, get them ready to evacuate. And he tries to get Worf to contact the Shellyak. That's going to take some time. Basically, they're going to have to try to delay.
And the planet is locked in architecture. Like it's kind of I like it. It looks fun. It would be fun to live there.
Yeah, I feel like this is a relatively common Star Trek outdoor architecture.
Little town place thing, yeah.
Yeah, like these archways and outdoor staircases, and it's all white. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just a redecorated set because Like, I'm pretty sure that this is where, like, in season 7, Ro ends up with the Maquis.
Yes,
It looks
yes.
exactly the same as
That's
this
what I was
place, and it's
thinking.
just like, but it's very like quaint and nice.
Yeah.
Anyways, so Harita
Harita and Kentor, or maybe Harita.
Harita-
I'm not sure.
Harita, yeah. So Harita and Kentor, the two that Data found when he landed, is they now introduce him to Goshevin, who is doing something with water. He's standing near this aqueduct, and that aqueduct becomes like a major centerpiece of their, like a symbol of their resistance to move, or his reluctance in particular.
Yeah, so Goshevin doesn't like Data. He doesn't like the fact that he's an android, and he's very skeptical of the fact, or of this whole idea of the Shellyak even existing. He's like, yeah, we've been here for 93 years. We've never seen a Shellyak, which is a good point, but the way he's so dismissive of Data makes you not like him very much.
Right, because we love Data,
Yeah.
but I think is reluctant. Like, if some person from the Federation that no one has seen for 100 years just shows up and is like, yeah, you guys got to get out of here because these aliens are coming, you'd probably be skeptical as well.
Yeah, so Goshevin basically explains a little bit of their history. So he says that the guidance system on the Artemis failed and took them off course, and they landed on Tau Cygna 5. And a third of the people who were on that ship died before they figured out a way to adapt to the radiation. And he is very proud, and he thinks the Federation would be super proud of what they've done.
Right, and Ruthie, what was the ingenious way that they found to adapt to all the radiation on the planet?
They don't say, do they?
No, they don't. No, they totally. They're just like, whatever. We adapted.
He doesn't even say, like, I phrased it as like they learned to adapt, but he says like, oh yeah, a third of them died before they learned that we could adapt. So the way he makes it sound is like they just realized they had to like allow themselves to adapt, and that they died on purpose or something. Like it's sort of weird the way he phrases it.
Yeah, I think it's just a way to avoid some techno babble and, whatever. They're like, it's not important. We adapted to the radiation.
Yeah.
So Data explains that in treaty, this planet belongs to the Shellyak. I'm guessing this planet actually lies outside of Federation space. So they are this planet that through treaty belongs to the Shellyak, and that they probably will not be able to change it. They say that the Shellyak want to colonize this planet and will eradicate the humans if they are still there when the Shellyak arrive.
Yeah, but Goshevin's like, nope. And he just sends Data away.
Yeah, so Data turns and quickly catches a piece of equipment that's been thrown at him. And then they introduce, I love this character. So this is Ardrian Mackenzie, who's like a total nerd. And basically Data is like her favorite thing in the universe because she loves robots. She like builds robots, we find out. And one robot has just landed on her planet. So for her, this is probably like the best thing that's ever going to happen in her life. And I know I always forget about her being in one of the episodes, but every time she shows up, I'm like, oh, I actually really like you. She's such a nerd, and she loves Data. She thinks Data's great.
I love the way she's like, you're the most sophisticated android I've ever seen. He's like, have you seen many androids? She's like, nope, you're the only one.
Nope, the only one, yeah. Goshevin immediately basically berates Data by calling him a walking calculator. So just super dismissive of Data.
Yeah, and he's a bit dismissive of Ardrian as well.
Yeah.
He says like, oh, you found a new toy? Apparently in an early draft, there was like a romance between Goshevin and Ardrian, which I feel like there are some remnants of left.
Ooh, maybe, yeah.
Like some sort of jealousy, but mostly he just doesn't, the way I take this is he just doesn't like the idea that anyone would be interested in what Data has to say, because that means dissent among the people.
Yeah, he definitely feels threatened by Data's presence.
Yeah.
So that is very clear in the way it's written. So Data doesn't have time to answer all of her questions, but she offers him help to learn more about the people and this planet as he transitions now to like cultural liaison.
Yeah. So on the observation lounge, Picard is like, okay, I'm going to ask you to do something. He's got LaForge and O'Brien there. And he and Riker are like, okay, we're going to ask you to do something. The one thing we don't want to hear is that it's impossible. Get the transporters to work, despite the hyperonic radiation. And LaForge is like, but that's impossible. And then he's like, oh, I see what you did there, Captain.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like, you know what I'm about to say. Like, no.
You know it's impossible, and you want me to do it anyway. So they get to work on it.
And Troy tells Picard that when the treaty was first signed with the Shellyak, the Federation sent 300 and 72 legal experts. And as we'll find out why in a moment.
Yeah.
But then they're like, what do we have? And Picard just says like thee and me. So it's up to them to figure this out. And as we find out later, the treaty's like 500,000 words long.
We go to the bridge. The Sheliak have not been responding to the Enterprise's hails. Worf tries again, and they finally answer, and it is Armis, basically.
Yeah, it basically looks like Armis. Yeah, I always wondered. I think back in the Armis episode, we referred to this episode in the future, and we were like, I think we're gonna see this costume with some.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's just the Armis costume without the goo.
Oh, it's without the goo. I wonder how they got the goo off that costume. I forget they just would have set the thing on fire.
Since season 1, they've been cleaning it.
Cleaning it for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, we need that costume. It's been hanging outside the back lot, like being rinsed off day after day. As a costume, it's basically just like a black blanket, like draped over a dude.
Yeah,
like
it
like,
does look like the person has like fins or whatever, but like they're
like
not supposed to be humanoid. I think also the person, and I'm not sure, IMDb was not clear about this. I think that the person voicing and like playing the Sheliak is the same as the person who was in the Armis costume, but not the same voice as Armis.
Yeah, because you got to you have to get all those motions down properly.
Yeah. So it's the same,
the goopy dude,
the same body, the same under
you
the
do goopy body,
the costume,
amorphous body, better than any of us. Go put on that costume. I wonder if Armis is a Sheliak.
That was what I was wondering too, because he said that like these like species of like brilliant light and beauty like just left him there and he was their skin of evil. I wonder if they just like shook all the goo off of themselves and sent it down to that planet.
They sent him down to the planet. Oh, the Sheliak don't seem that great, so maybe maybe he was like the worst of them and he dropped them off on that planet or something. And then he's like, now he's some other entity.
The rest of them are not that better though, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think more likely what it is we're just saving money in the costume department. That's what happened. So the Sheliak are not interested in conversation, and they say that their involvement in the Federation illegalities is not indicated. So they don't think that it's intentional that this colony is there, but they say that regardless, they have 3 days to get the people off the planet because that's when they are probably going to arrive. So Picard tries to negotiate a compromise. The Sheliak are like, nope, the law is the law. We've got this treaty, and they hang up on Picard.
Yeah, he's like in the middle of a word, and they hang up on him.
So they are very much to the letter of the law. That's what we find out about the Sheliak. They're like, they've got this treaty, they're going to follow it, and that is it.
Yeah. On the planet, Data and Ardrian talk about how Goshevin is unwilling to prepare for the possibility of evacuation. And they're in Ardrian's house, and she's got all kinds of like computers and like nerdy things. I feel like she has a Star Wars droid in the corner.
It looks very much like a Star Wars type droid. Yeah, it's all very clunky and robot-y looking. It basically looks like a gas can with like some beams plugged into the side of it and then like a hairdryer sitting on its head. It's funny.
Yeah. And she like says something about not having computers nearly as sophisticated as Data, and Data looks at that droid and it's like, no, you don't. You're right.
Yeah, it throws total shade at her robot there in the corner. Picard calls down and he tells Data that the Sheliak they're not backing off. So they're trying to get Starfleet to arrange a transport, but basically like it's kind of up to Data to figure out what to do and prep these people for departure.
Yeah, because he's the only one who can really communicate with them. I don't know why he can communicate with the ship, but Picard can't communicate with Goshevin. I only just thought of that now, but whatever.
Yeah, actually, I did not consider that either. Yeah. That is, and you know why? Because as you said, this is a Data episode. That is why that is happening. It's about Data's growth.
Yeah, it's about Data's growth. So we get this really brief scene in the transporter room where LaForge and O'Brien and Wesley Crusher are experimenting on transporting these like metal tubes that these are like what they always use for transporter experiments. So they like transport it through the radiation, I guess, and it comes back like all melted and really not what you want to see when you're working with the transporter. And like Riker comes in, he's like, oh, what's that? And they're like, well, that's our first attempt. He's like, all right, keep at it. Offers zero support, help, nothing. Just like, good, keep working, bye.
Back on the planet, Goshevin shows Data the water that they have, and he's like, do you know what this is? Data's like, it's water. And he's like, no, it's blood and sweat and tears and the result of 90 years and combined effort. He's like, my grandfather, we hear this phrase often in the episode. He's like, my grandfather was buried on that mountain and he died surveying the route for the aqueduct and says that the colony exists because of his and other sacrifices and that he won't leave. So, I mean, this is a good point. He's making a point that they've done all this work. They brought water to the desert, he literally says.
Yeah.
They made this a hospitable place to live.
There is. And so this is also, though, one of my earlier reactions, like when I was younger and watching this, one of my reactions was like, yeah, like they worked so hard so that you could live. And now you want to stay here when it is very certain that you will not live.
Right.
And I think that is kind of the way the episode is framing it. But again, like we talked about, like it's more than that. And Data is certainly not doing any like sort of affirming of their reactions to this. Like, yes, it is upsetting that I am telling you that you have to leave when you have been here for generations and you have no idea who I am, and the Federation unintentionally, but still just kind of left you there.
I was evicted recently from my apartment.
Right.
And not at all to make a similar parallel to what's going on the other side of the world.
No.
But when I left the apartment, I did come to like another realization where most of those episodes or past episodes have been recorded. I was like, well, yeah, this place is actually terrible. Like it was not a good place to live. It was a bad basement apartment and I had a terrible landlord, and I'm in a much better place now. And I didn't see it that way at the time. At the time, it was like, well, I've made the best of this space. I'm settled here. I don't want to pack up all my belongings. I don't want to like move somewhere else. Emotionally, I'm trying to do that while dealing with work and like everything else. And it's hard. Even if it's a place that's difficult to live in, you find a way to find an attachment to it. I think that's part of how we survive.
Yeah.
I did not want to go. And even though now I'm in a better place and I'm glad that I left, at the time, that was like really difficult. So imagine trying to move an entire society, like a whole planet. You're also thinking about like, what if, are we going to be together again? All 15,000 of us somewhere? Are we going to be split up? Yeah. Is our culture survive relocation like that? What about the traditions that we form that are connected to this place?
Yes.
You know, that are all going to be gone. How long is a day on this planet? Like, you know, that we've created our celebrations, the calendar of things that we've done, like all that stuff gets removed. And so it's not just life, it's the way of life itself that also might be lost at the same time.
Yeah, totally. So Data is not taking any of this into account. So he tells Adrian that he needs to convince other people of the necessity of leaving. He's not going to convince Goshevin, but maybe he can convince other people, and she agrees to help him.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So in the ready room, Picard tells Riker that Starfleet won't be able to send transportation for another 3 weeks. How far away is everything else? We're the only ship in range.
I was going to say, this is your favorite. We're the only ship in range.
We're the only ship in range. So they'll have to get the Shellyak to extend the deadline. But then they have this moment where Picard's like, wait a second, if they're going to be here in just a couple days, that must mean a ship is already on the way. So we're going to go and intercept that ship.
Yeah. I do have to say, they're like, okay, we've got 2 days. And originally they had 3 days. This is my like qualm with Star Trek always, is they are so bad at showing time passing. It does not feel like it. So many other shows do this. You can tell it's the next day. On the Enterprise, there is no way to tell it's the next day because the lights are always the same. Like, if they had not said that there are 2 days left, I would not have thought that more than like, I don't know, a few hours had passed.
A few hours had gone by. I think they try to show that a little bit on the planet surface because they show like a day-night cycle on the planet. And when they're getting together at nighttime, they put like cricket sounds in the background. I've noticed that on the planet. So there's space crickets on this world.
And even I've seen this episode, you know, I don't know how many times, but I never noticed that a day had passed until I was like watching it to like take notes for recording. That like I thought this whole thing took place within a day, this whole episode.
A day. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think the other reason why we skip a lot of time on the Enterprise is that it's like literally it would just be a view of the bridge for hours and hours and hours while they travel from like one star system to another, and Picard just like reading a book until they get there. That would be it. It'd be like a totally different show. It'd be like space ASMR. Like that's basically what it would be. Anyway, so Riker tells Data that they plan to intercept the ship and then try and buy more time for the evacuation. And Data tells him like, I think I'm out of my depth here. I think which is a bit of a parallel to maybe his performance at the beginning of the show. Yes. As a cultural contact, I have proven to be less than exemplary.
Yeah. And he starts listing off. He says that the leader doesn't want to listen to him. And then he's like, I have spoken to I don't know, however many people. And he's like, this many want to do, they don't believe that a threat exists. This many want to stay and fight or negotiate. This many are like, haven't even listened to me. And it's only this many. And Riker's like, listen, I can't help you. And he says that the treaty is the only thing that prevented the Sheliak from eradicating the colony when they first discovered it. So it's going to be violent. There's no getting around that at this point.
Yeah. Data also, he makes a comment here, which I think also is kind of a straw man argument again, where he's like, well, whenever I talk to them, they just keep making references to like land and buildings and stuff. Like he's not at all understanding their connection to place.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's because Data has also never really lived in one place before. Like his home is the ship.
Yeah.
His memory of being tied to a planet have been kind of erased, as we find out, like on Omicron Theta, like he didn't really have many memories of like his growing up and his childhood and stuff like that.
I feel like that is an interesting interpretation of this. I also think that likely was not intentional, and more the issue is that the writers just weren't engaging with that side of it, and they did set it up to be an irrational attachment to the land, and that it's more that the writers didn't have that knowledge.
You could have maybe still written this episode then as still being a Data growth episode and still take into account those things about place and home.
Yeah.
And maybe have Data come to like a better understanding of that. What if Data like changed his mind and started advocating for them to stay on the planet? Like, wouldn't that have been interesting? Where he tells Picard, like, I don't think we should be moving these people. It's actually unethical.
There are some episodes where that comes up.
And a whole movie.
Yes.
As well.
Yes,
that kind of
too.
covers that topic.
So there, I feel it feels sort of like this is an episode where like the writers were just like, this is the story we're telling.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea what happened in the writers' room, and apparently there were a bunch of different drafts that had different things, like the romance between Adrian and Goshevin. But it really just feels like they were kind of singularly, we're making it about this and nothing else.
Yeah, and I think that's how these episodes were designed, because we're not like in, we're still going by episode here. There's no arcs, this is kind of just how TV was.
Yeah.
But it feels comfy. So in that sense, we got that little, here we got to stay in this circle, and we're gonna change everyone's minds and hearts by the end of the show.
Yeah.
That we now know is more than just one day.
Yeah.
Adrian at least tells Data that the people are asking about the Sheliak.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. So Goshevin has called a public meeting now.
Goshevin doesn't believe anything that Data's saying, but at least that'll give Data an opportunity to present his recommendation. But Data's kind of like down on it. He's like, well, yeah, I could, I guess, but I haven't really been very successful in doing that. And her response to this is to kiss him on the mouth.
Yeah, and he's like, hey, listen, like the Sheliak killed my last girlfriend, so I'm feeling a bit triggered right now. He's like, so he's like, too many memories are surfacing here.
It's so weird. Like, he interprets this as a gesture of support, because she's like, well, you seem to need it, but like, that's not how kissing works. You don't just see someone who's sad and you're like, you know what you need is for my lips to be against your lips. Like,
but this is the future, Ruthie. And in the future, this is how kissing works. It's going to be a great future, I think. So I need a sign of support. I think part of this is also that like Adrienne also maybe not super understand human behavior too, because she's like, I think they coded her that way on purpose so that like she finds more of an interaction with Data. I didn't see it as being like, crossing boundaries.
I don't think Data took it that way. I do find that this is just an issue with how women are sometimes written in Star Trek and
sure.
80s and 90s, and
it's
kind of how they were written on television, that like it comes out, I think, that Adrienne has feelings for Data. She's got a crush on him.
Oh, totally.
But like,
who doesn't have a crush on Data?
For sure. I mean, I have a crush on every member of the crew, to be honest. But like, I just feel like it is sort of written in this way where you can't have a woman without having some sort of romantic subplot.
Right. Yeah.
Even if it's like an unrequited romantic subplot.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fair.
I do like Adrienne as a character. Like I love, like you said, like her sort of nerdy fascination with all things robotic. Yeah. Anyway, but she does say, because he's like, oh, I guess you were kissing me as a gesture of support, and she's like, oh, you really don't understand human behavior, do you? And he's like, no, I don't. And she's like, yep, neither do I, to be honest.
Yeah. And so Adrian suggests that sometimes being rational isn't enough because people are, can be inherently irrational. Not to say again that this is an irrational position that the community is taking, but, maybe he should use reverse psychology. So the Data realizes that this is another situation where, as he said at the beginning of the episode, excessive honesty can be detrimental.
Yeah. He's like, oh, interesting. I just had an experience that would be relevant to this.
Yeah. Imagine that. Back in the transporter room, LaForge, O'Brien, and Wesley now are experimenting with these test rods, but they're still melting.
They're still melting, and it's just like a couple seconds. Picard enters, and he's like, splendid, carry on, and then leaves, and again, provides no help or any acknowledgement of how difficult this is.
At least being supportive. He didn't yell at them.
He didn't yell at them, it's true. Wesley says he wants the impossible, and LaForge says that's the short definition of captain.
Right. Also, where are they beaming these things to? Because haven't they left orbit to go intercept the Shellyak by now?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I was like, I think maybe they haven't left orbit yet, and they're still, because they're doing all these unless they've created their own hyperonic radiation lab and they're just trying to beam stuff through the radiation, but not back and forth from the planet, I guess.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not sure the writers really put a lot of thought into that particular aspect.
Yeah, maybe it didn't matter too much.
That's not what this episode is about, Matthew.
No, it's not. It's about Data's growth, as we found out.
Yeah.
So, at the planet, they have a public meeting, and Goshevin says that he's going to replace misinformation with cold, hard fact.
Yeah.
And which is weird, because I thought Data was giving them the cold, hard facts. But
fake news, Data's fake news.
Fake news, and he just tells Data to leave. He doesn't even it's not like a meeting where they're going to have a conversation. He's like, just get out of here, android.
Yeah, and this is part of the problem with how Goshevin is written, and it is to make him unlikable, clearly. But he's not even allowing there to be discussion on this. And Data says, do you think that your position is so weak that it can't even withstand debate, which is unfortunately now a obnoxious sort of way of goading people
debate me, bro.
Debate. Yeah, exactly. Debate me, bro.
Yeah.
And no, it's not that I think my position is so weak. It's that I don't have the energy to debate every single person who wants to debate because my time is not free. But Harita tells Goshevin to let him speak.
That's foreshadowing more stuff that's going to happen, that it was that particular character who's kind of speaking out against Goshevin.
Yeah. So Data, I would say, does not do a great job with the reverse psychology because he kind of admits that that's what he's doing. And after 5 seconds, he's like, oh, right. I'm not going to waste time trying to reverse Goshevin's decision. I admire your conviction in the face of defeat, and when you die, you will die for your land and for honor, and your children will understand that they are dying for a worthy cause, and your courage will be remembered and extolled. And then Adrian is kind of like, oh, remembered by who? And Data's like, oh, you're right, yes. There will be no one left to remember you.
And then Goshevin gives the best slow clap.
Yeah.
I think it's the only slow clap in all of Star Trek.
Is it?
I was thinking about this. Yeah, I couldn't think of another one. I was like, oh yeah, look at that slow clap.
Yeah.
Data cut pretty deep when he goes up and he actually puts a hand on the shoulder of a child, and he's like, your children will understand that they're dying for honor. And I was like, oh man,
he starts off pretty strong, but then when Goshevin's like, you must have a low opinion of us, and he's like, oh, I was just trying to show you in a way that would appeal to your emotions. And if you're gonna do that, maybe don't say it.
Yeah, this is where excessive honesty might have been detrimental to Data, but he gives a really good Data try at this, so I appreciate that.
He does. Harita and Kentor both think that Data might be right, but then Goshevin again goes on about generations gave their lives for this colony. He again starts to say the thing about his grandfather, but Adrian interrupts him and says, yeah, he was buried on that hill. Who's going to bury you?
Yeah, that's a good point.
A reasonable question. Yes, you don't want to leave, and that makes sense. But if all that's going to happen if we stay is we die, then what are we fighting for?
She also interrupts him when he says it. He's like, my grandfather, and she finishes the sentences. And buried on that mountain, because he's probably heard this 30 times already.
Yeah.
And so Goshevin says that if they evacuate, they'll abandon everything they have, which is true.
Yep.
Everything they've accomplished, it'll be nothing. Maybe that's not true, but that's how he perceives it.
Yeah.
And he doesn't think that their chances are as hopeless as Data says, that is kind of irrational, because they don't have any idea what the Shellyak are really capable of, technologically and whatever else. But he's willing to to bet everyone's life on them, which is very much like a rah-rah, like here we'll stand and we're going to defend ourselves.
Yeah, and he says that. He says, here we stand, and Data's like, well, then here you die. And I also feel like I don't understand why this is an all or nothing thing. Is no one else allowed to leave if they want to? Like, are they prisoners on this planet? Like, they're clearly not. But it feels like Goshevin is the only one who gets to decide whether anybody can leave.
Yeah, the leadership structure here is not very good. Yeah. Like, there's not, like, there doesn't seem to be like a council.
No. He says at one point, he's like, you elected me your leader.
Yeah.
But then now that they've elected him leader, they have no say in anything.
Yeah. Now you've elected everything that comes afterwards. That's not fair.
Yeah.
I don't think that's not democratic. Marita and Kentor tell Data that some of them do disagree with Goshevin or want to hear more, but aren't comfortable confronting Goshevin, so they plan a secret meeting at Adrian's house.
So in the ready room, Troy and Picard discuss some of the difficulties that come up with communicating with the Sheliak. And Troy says the issue is that they have no common point of reference, which is uncommon. Usually there is some kind of point of reference. And Troy says that the Sheliak have learned several Federation languages, but no one from the Federation has ever managed to learn the Sheliak's language. And telepaths have also tried and failed to communicate with them.
Yeah, and she says that it's remarkable that alien races can communicate at all, which is never really like a problem in Star Trek ever, because they just have like the universal translator. It is an interesting point, like around language and how we actually communicate with each other. This actually comes up a lot in the planetarium when I'm doing planetarium shows and we're talking about finding life elsewhere in the universe. And if we were to receive a message, one of the coolest things that I ever got to do was hang out with Dr. Jill Tarter, who is the founder of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And this is things that they think about. Like, if we were to receive a communication from an alien civilization, how would we ever actually be able to decode it?
Yeah.
And one of my favorite space movies of all time is Arrival. And if anyone hasn't seen that movie, you should see it. But the lead character in that movie is a linguist when aliens show up on Earth, and they seek her out to figure out how to communicate. Anyway, so Troy, she holds up like a cup, like one of her teacup, and she's like, okay, say I hold up this cup and I say the word Sismarith, which is a word that I think she's just made up.
Yeah.
She's like, so what do you think that I'm meaning? And he's like, I don't know, cup, hot. And she's like, yeah, but it could also mean brown or liquid or like all these other things that might mean in that context. So communication is really hard.
Yeah, it is. So she tells Picard that when he's talking to the Sheliak, he has to be extremely accurate. And this is where she says it's 500,000 words long, because the Sheliak found the Federation language irrational and they wanted to avoid future misunderstandings. 500,000 words is like 1,000 pages single-spaced. Like, that's huge.
Maybe it would have been interesting if at this point, well, also probably, again, outside the scope of the episode, but that rather than, I guess, English, which it's written in, the Sheliak, if they'd learned multiple Federation languages, were like, actually, Vulcan.
Right.
And then they have to go find that guy who's playing viola at the beginning of the episode. And it turns out he has like a major role. They're like, hey, you're the only Vulcan on the ship right now. Can you like interpret this language for us?
We got to bring back Lieutenant Solar, get Susie Plaxton back from.
Oh, yes. Dr. Solar, of course. Yeah, I forgot about her. She's always on the ship. We only just mentioned her by name for the rest of the show. But yeah.
So Riker calls to the captain. They have intercepted the Sheliak ship. So Picard requests face-to-face negotiations, which he says they are entitled to under paragraph 653, subparagraph 9. So the Sheliak are like, yes, we will face-to-face negotiate with you, and then just hang up.
So the Sheliak are like, they're like evil space lawyers. Now we're at Adrian's house, which is it's a comfy little house, and Kentor asks Data if they will be left alone once the Federation resettles them. And Data says that they will if that's what they want.
So Kentor is now on board. So they just need to convince Goshevin, who has a lot of supporters. And Adrian kind of tries to say to Kentor, like, you do too. Like, people listen to you. But Goshevin at this point enters and he's like, yeah, don't forget that I have a lot of supporters. And he says he's disappointed. He's like, I thought we settled this. But like, they didn't settle anything. The way they settled it was he said the conversation is done, but he didn't actually hear what anyone else was thinking.
Like, his leadership skill there is not great. And then he just assaults Data, like straight up zaps him with this beam of energy.
Yeah. And Data, like, just falls over, and Harita's like, you killed him. Goshavin's like, no, I just shut down a machine. And then he tells everyone to go home, and he's like, you'll see that I'm right. Ardrina is not convinced, and she sort of gets out another piece of equipment and starts examining an unconscious Data.
When he's like, I killed no one, is that because he doesn't consider Data a life form, or because he knows that he only deactivated Data? And I wasn't sure.
I thought it was the first one, that he doesn't consider Data to be a person. Much like the Shellyak don't consider humans to be people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've intercepted the Shellyak vessel, and I like the design of it. It's like, it's a classic kind of generic Star Trek looking freighter type ship.
I think it actually was used in like an original series movie or something. It's a reuse.
I believe it's piece of a vessel that appears in the beginning of Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock.
Right, yes.
Where they're selling the Genesis secrets to the Klingons. I think that's where that ship is from, or at least pieces of it are. But it looks fun. It's a fun looking, like, very steampunky, pipey looking ship.
Yeah, it looks a little out of place with like TNG sleekness, but yeah, I do like it.
Totally.
I do like it.
Yeah. So Picard and Troy beam aboard, and Picard says that they will comply with the request to move the colonists. They just need time.
Can we talk a little bit about what the interior of the ship looks like?
No, it doesn't really look like anything. It's kind of this black void.
Well, it's like it's so dark, and then there are these like pieces of glass hanging from the ceiling.
The Shellyak is kind of inside the pieces of glass, like it's some kind of command console made of crystals or glass or stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's so dark. Like there's very little detail on it because it's just black. So the Shellyak director says that the given time has elapsed, and the ship carries the membership, and they will proceed with debarkation.
Yeah, it's all very cold and technical sounding.
Yeah, so Troy is like, come on, like these people, they're not going to interfere with your plans. And Picard tries to explain about like timing. Shellyak is they're just reading the treaty. They're like, no, you are in violation of the treaty, which says that unwanted life forms on H-class worlds can be removed at the discretion of the Shellyak corporate, which is a ridiculous thing to have in the treaty. Let's just maybe start with that. Like,
yeah, I suppose that during the legal negotiations with the hundreds of people from the Federation, they were like, well, this will never become a problem because we're never going to put people on any of these worlds.
I guess.
But
it's still ridiculous. Like, that should never be part of a treaty. And Picard is like, I'm not arguing whether we are in violation of the treaty. We are in violation of the treaty, and we will fix it. We just need more time. And the Shellyak is like, well, we'll save you time. We'll eradicate the human infestation for you.
Yeah, that's literally how they phrase it. Now, Picard gets very angry, and he's like, they're not vermin. And Shellyak says that intelligent converse is impossible, and then transports Troy Picard back to the Enterprise. Literally beams them back with their own transporters right to their own bridge.
Again, in the middle of Picard's sentence.
Yeah, which I don't think he's appreciating at this point.
Nope.
Back at Ardrian's house, Data wakes up and explains that his diagnostic circuits are able to repair many malfunctions. So he's basically rebooted himself.
Ardrian is upset because it seems that everyone just caved to Goshaven. And she's like, I guess people's words don't really mean very much. And Data's like, oh, you're right. Words don't mean very much. We need to use actions.
Yeah, we might have to find some kind of demonstration. Data uses his own neurosubprocessors to create a servo circuit to make the phaser work despite the radiation.
Yeah, so this was also apparently a rewrite from the original script. Originally, phasers did work. You may recall at the beginning of the episode, they talked about like interferes with like communications, phasers, sensors, and transporters. But originally, it didn't interfere with phasers, but it was just that Data didn't want to use violence. So I feel like that perhaps might have been more interesting.
Yeah, it gives Data more choices to make in that circumstance. But anyways, he pulls out like a little circuit from his arm, which happens to fit perfectly inside of the phaser. I noticed.
That's handy.
It's handy. And now, basically, Ardrian says that he has made a smarter phaser that can work in the radiation.
Yes.
And he tells Ardrian to tell Goshaven that he's heading to the pumping station and is going to destroy the aqueduct.
He knows a message that's going to get Goshaven to come for sure.
That's right.
So on the bridge, the Enterprise and the Shellyak are basically nose to nose, and Picard calls for a yellow alert and tells Riker to match any move the vessel makes.
Picard hails the Shellyak and tells them that they will have to get past the Enterprise to get to the colony, then closes channels, and then's like, okay, we've been being beaten over the head by this treaty for 3 days. Let's see if we can find something inside of it to turn to our own advantage. So let's become legal experts now ourselves.
Yeah, it is. It was a little funny to me the way he's like, let me take a look at this treaty. Like, I'm sorry, is this the first time you're looking at this treaty?
I guess not, because he did know that there was room in it. He cited it before, but I guess they want to become like this much more familiar with it in this case. But it is interesting that he puts himself like between himself and the ship, because what if they now get into like a firefight? Like, are they going to go to war now? Is he changing his mind over this? He's doing everything he can to protect that colony.
Yeah, which I appreciated. And I, again, to draw parallels to things that are happening in the world right now, I mean, I think that one of the big issues is that the powerful nations are not doing that right now.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you do need to stand up to the people who are trying to eradicate a group of people from a location. You can't just be like, oh, please don't. You actually have to take action to stop them.
Yeah, or be like, the situation's complex, so I guess it warrants all this like mass death.
Yeah, no.
So no, he's like, no, I'm going to put my ship in front of yours and we are going to have this talk.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
So Data shows up. They have like people protecting the pumping station. So there's 4 people there with guards and they've got their little rifles. Data just appears up from behind one of the steps and like zaps all 4 of them. They all get stunned. And then he says, this is the stun setting. And then he's like, this is not. And he jacks up the power of the phaser, shoots the aqueduct, and you can actually see the beam of energy travel all through all the piping all the way back to the top of the mountain and like blowing up pumps and stuff all along the way.
I want to point out this is the first time we're seeing the new phaser.
Oh, yeah, this isn't the roundy phaser anymore.
It no longer looks like a dustbuster.
Yeah, I miss dustbuster phaser.
This is a much more reasonably sized hand weapon, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. I guess we get a pretty close look up at it. I wonder if that's one of the reasons why they did that part. Yeah. They're like, hey, let's show off our new phaser.
Yeah.
He says that he could reduce the whole station to a pile of debris. That's not even the most powerful setting on the phaser.
Yeah.
And he's one android with a single weapon, not like the hundreds of Shellyak with more powerful weapons. And then even then, the Shellyak can just blow up the whole colony from orbit. He's like, you will die with never having seen the faces of your killers.
Yes. Which, again, is very close to home right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kentor says to Goshevin, there are other places, there are other challenges. And then he and Harita both walk off, basically saying, I think, basically communicating, like, we as a people are not reliant on this particular space that we have.
Yeah.
We can continue, which I do think is important. Like, that is true, that leaving your home does not take everything away from you. That doesn't mean it's okay to remove someone from their home at all. Mm-hmm. But it is important to remember that if you do have to leave your home, you can still maintain your traditions and culture and relationships.
I think it's telling that Kentor says this because they've been kind of hinting at the fact that he is another leader figure, but they're kind of just waiting for him to step up a little bit. And he sees this as his moment. So that's when he openly calls out Goshevin in this scene and is like, he's pretty emotional about it. He's like, there's other places, other challenges, and then, walks away. And I think that shows the shift in the balance of favor toward Goshevin. So now Goshevin has a change of heart. Do you feel that this is realistic?
I mean, I think that, like the demonstration is more effective than the words, and actually seeing like, oh, he was able to do that and we were not able to defend ourselves, and we won't be able to defend ourselves if someone comes at us from orbit. This exchange between Goshevin and Data, I actually remember very viscerally from my childhood, where Goshevin says, like, I really was willing to stay here and die for the colony. And Data says that this aqueduct is just a thing and things can be replaced, but lives cannot. And I feel like that is something that often gets sort of said. Things can be replaced, but people can't be. And it's true. And at the same time, I think it, again, ignores the trauma of losing everything that you have as a trauma.
And especially if it can't be replaced.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe because in the world you can't afford to replace some things, or they are precious and never replaceable.
I mean, I can just think if I look around where I live, like there are a lot of things that I am reliant on.
Sure.
Like my stove or my microwave or my fridge. Those are just things. But if I didn't have them, my life would be a lot more difficult than it is.
This is the standpoint that the place of rationality that Data says that he's coming from. And I think that the episode is written around is that, lives are not stuff. This is more valuable. Yeah. But there's more of an overlap, I think, in the intertwining of our lives and the amount of effort we've put into something and what it means to us and tradition and history. And I think Gojibin folds quickly here. Like his attitude changes really fast, but I always felt like, yeah, it is after that big demonstration, but it's also near the end of the episode. Yeah. So we got to get to that point where and everything's fine and we're going to go now. But we still have to figure out how to get more time because we haven't got that yet. Yeah. We still need to figure out the time of how to get them off the planet.
Yeah. So Riker and Worf and Picard are looking over the treaty, Troy as well. They're looking over the treaty and Worf is like, this is hopeless. Fighting would be preferable.
Yeah, of course Worf's going to say that. He's like, I have to read.
Of course. And Riker gives him the funniest look. He just kind of looks at him for a few seconds. And I feel like what's going through his head is like, wow, that really is your solution to everything.
Yeah. I mean, Riker might get to that point. Sometimes he's not far behind where Worf already is sometimes.
It's true.
I think it's why they get along. So Picard finds something. He's looking at the treaty and something comes out there around arbitration. And he's like, that's it. Yeah. And he walks over and he says, pursuant to paragraph 1290, he formally requests third-party arbitration of the dispute.
Can I just say that is wild that is in the treaty, that any dispute, even when, as Picard has said, they are the ones who are in violation of the treaty. You could just be like, I want this arbitrated, and I'm going to pick someone who is hibernating for 6 months. That is such a funny thing to have in the treaty.
Something the Federation made sure got in there.
They're like, we know we're going to have problems with these people, so
we need it out.
At any point, for any problem we have, even if we are in the wrong, we can request arbitration.
So the Sheliak, they are to the letter of the law, so they're like, you have the right.
Picard says that they're going to name, again, as is their right, the Grisellas to arbitrate. But unfortunately, the Grisellas are currently in a hibernation cycle, so they will only be able to settle the matter in 6 months when they wake up.
Yeah, and so Picard asks if they want to wait or give the Enterprise 3 weeks. And then the Sheliak are like, we could brook no delay. And then Picard is like, well, so this treaty is in abeyance. And the Sheliak is like, wait. And then he actually tells Worf this time to hang up on the Sheliak.
Yeah. And Riker's like, you enjoyed that. Picard is like, yeah, of course I enjoyed that.
He's like, you're damned right.
They've cut me off twice, once with a transporter. Yes, I enjoyed that.
Yeah. So Worf says that the Sheliak are hailing them. And now what happens is one of my favorite things to ever happen in Star Trek The Next Generation. Picard takes the time. He walks across the bridge slowly, and the camera just follows him walk across the bridge. He looks at the dedication plaque of the Enterprise, kind of runs his finger along the top of it to brush off some dust, walks back toward the center of the bridge, waits a few more moments, and then he's like, on screen. Yeah. Just to make the Sheliak wait. It's awesome.
I love it. So the Sheliak tell Picard that they can have their 3 weeks.
Picard's like, thank you. And then they just close the channel.
Yeah. Then LaForge enters. He tells Picard that they can modify the transporters. It's really exciting. Picard is like, oh, great. He's like, it'll take 15 years and a research team of 100, but then we'll be able to do it.
We'll postpone.
Never mind. We figured it out.
Now, Data is back in his shuttle, and he's getting ready to leave, and Ardrian approaches and says that the evacuation plan is going well, and he says that he's very grateful for her assistance, and she's happy because that means that he won't forget her.
Yeah, and Data says, the most android possible thing. He's like, you're right, I won't forget you, because I don't forget anything.
Right.
I'll remember everything about this.
Yeah, and she's like, it's probably not what she was going for.
She asks if he has feelings for her.
Yeah, she's like, do you have any feelings for me at all? And then he's like, I have no feelings of any kind. But then kisses her anyway when she seems disappointed.
Yeah, and she realizes that this, again, is just he was just being rational. He saw that she was upset and was like, maybe this will cheer you up.
And then he just goes. He just walks in the shuttle. Yep. He doesn't say goodbye.
Yep.
He just sits in the shuttle. The door starts to close. And then she's the one she's like, bye. She kind of says it through the window. And then we don't see Ardrian ever again, Unfortunately.
Back in the ready room, Data enters and Picard is listening to a recording of his concert. He says the good doctor was kind enough to provide a recording of the concert that Picard missed. I think this is like a nice showing that Data thought Picard was leaving because he was so unimpressed with just the beginning of Data's concert. But now he sees, oh no, he actually wanted to listen to it.
Yeah. It's very sweet that Picard did that and that he's listening to it as he comes back in.
Yeah.
Picard says that his performance shows feeling, which is an interesting contrast to what Data just said, being down on the planet.
Yeah, and Data's like, I don't actually have any feeling. Like, I was just imitating Jascha Heifetz and Trenka Bronkin. Jascha Heifetz is, or was, a classical violinist throughout the 20th century. I think he died in the mid-80s, like 87 or something like this. Trenka Bronkin is not an actual musician. So this is someone born post now.
Classic Star Trek, they like list, if you're listing places that people have been to, it's usually like one or two real places and then one planet somewhere in the Federation, or like when they're mentioning people, it'll be like two humans and then one alien is fictional. So they just tie the history to like now.
Yeah, I love when they do that. But Picard points out that actually, like, no, there is some of Data in this because he's the one who chose these two musicians, and apparently they have very different styles and techniques, but Data managed to combine them successfully.
Yeah, and Data realizes that he's learned to be creative when necessary. And then Picard just says, I look forward to your next concert, which I think is really nice. That was a nice thing to say.
And then that's the end of the episode. The Enterprise flies away.
We saved the day.
Data had some growth. We avoided any uncomfortable conversations about displacement. Do you have any other thoughts on this one, Matt?
There's a lot of stuff going on here, I think, because of everything that we talked about going on in the world in the wider context. And I really do like this episode. And certainly you could have more conversation around the ethics of displacement. And I wonder if the writers saw that there was more room for these kinds of conversations in an episode like this, because it isn't the first time we find an episode that's around displacement or a movie, but we look at it kind of from different angles each time and how that works.
Yeah, I think one thing actually that I was thinking of, so I know this is a little off topic, but I know, so you recently had the, there was recently the Trek Talks virtual conference, which we talked about in a previous episode. And you talked about, I know in the panel that you did, I listened to it recently because it's also on your other podcast.
Yeah.
You talked about the discussion that they had on the Tuvix panel.
Right.
And I actually watched that panel. Tuvix, for anyone who has not watched Voyager, is about, I'll spoil it for you, but it's about an episode of, or Tuvix is an episode of Voyager where two characters, Tuvok and Neelix, because of a transporter accident, they meld together and become one person who is called Tuvix. Tuvix is his own person with relationships with people. And at the end of the episode, Captain Janeway makes the decision to separate them and, in effect, kill Tuvix at the expense of Tuvok and Neelix. I remember in that panel, I think it was Robert Duncan McNeil, who played Tom Paris, said that he felt like Tuvix could have been the one to make that decision to sacrifice himself. And the writer of that episode was like, no, but then that would lower the stakes too much.
Yeah, I think it was Lisa Klink was on that panel, and she was talking about being in the writer's room for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I thought was so interesting was I really feel like if that had been a TNG episode, and if that had come out like now, or sorry, not now, but like in the time of when this episode came out, like if that had come out in the late 80s or perhaps the early 90s, it would have been Tuvix making the decision, because they didn't put their characters through having to make those decisions that the audience might disagree with.
Oh, okay. So you feel like it's the storytelling evolved over time.
I think so, because like the fact that they had Janeway make that decision is just so contrary to all kinds of things that happen in TNG, where it's like, we're going to have this difficult decision. Oh, but we don't have to make that decision anymore. Something has gotten in the way or has made it so that the decision is made for us.
Kind of taken away at the last moment or something.
Exactly. And I think this is sort of an example of not quite that, but of like we're we could have a really difficult conversation, but we're not going to. But then as the show evolved, they did have more difficult conversations and acknowledged that the Federation is not perfect, Starfleet is not perfect. People sometimes have to weigh two very uncomfortable things and come up with something that is not going to be an easy, comfortable solution.
Yeah, in a way, this might be like a predecessor, like a precursor to the conversations that come up around the Maquis.
Yes.
Later on in further in other seasons. So we don't just drop this challenge. It ends up being put to the characters again.
Yeah. Just not in this episode.
And not in this way. And in fact, like, it's one of the things that I find the most revealing and also disappointing about Picard as a character is how he handles that in the future.
Yeah.
But those will be for future episodes of the podcast.
Oh, yeah. I think we've said all that I have to say on this one.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of With the First Link. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast provider of choice.
Our cover art was created by Nathan Nunn, and you can find more of his work at nathannunn.ca. Our theme song is An Amazing Adventure by Flame Lion Studio. You can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at FirstLinkPod, or send us an email at firstlinkpod@gmail.com to tell us whether you trust computers or humans, or if you want to have a more difficult conversation about displacement, you can email us about that too. I'm Ruthie.
And I'm Matthew, and if you have a lot of reading to do for your studying, don't invite Worf as your study buddy.